An electric week of football with some of the craziest games I've ever witnessed, looking at you, Giants and Broncos, has left me more confused about what is actually happening in the NFL. Let's jump into my game recaps and thoughts. Thursday night football this week is what many have deemed as the Unk Bowl. This is only the second time in the Super Bowl era that two quarterbacks over the age of 40 have faced off, even though Drew Brees and Tom Brady did it multiple times, and honestly, their experience showed. Aaron Rodgers did have a couple of costly interceptions in the second quarter, which both led to points for the Bengals, but otherwise, it was a pretty clean game. This isn't the Joe we imagined would bring the Bengals to success this year, but with 3 touchdowns on the day, he certainly looked like him. This is also no discredit to either team's running game, with both Jaylen Warren and Chase Brown tallying over 100 yards rushing on the day, but neither ended the game with a touchdown. This actually turned out to be one of the more exciting games of the week, with the Steelers coming back from a 10-point deficit in the fourth quarter to take the lead by 1 point with only slightly more than 2 minutes on the clock. Joe Flacco proceeds to have a generational drive, completing 3 15-plus yard passes and putting Cincinnati in field goal range. Evan McPherson drills the kick, handing Pittsburgh their second loss of the season and possibly pulling the Bengals back from a dangerous downward spiral. In the opposite of the Thursday night game, this week's international game and the final game played in London was an absolute blowout. It isn't very often that you see a quarterback have less than 200 yards and still manage to rack up 5 touchdowns, but Matthew Stafford made it happen here. I think this game offensively for Jacksonville mostly fell apart due to poor play calling. They had 0 turnovers through traditional means, but turned the ball over on downs 4 times, 2 of which happened in just the third quarter. They were making it across midfield and then just sputtering out. They did finally get a touchdown in the fourth quarter by the time the game was already finished, which LA then immediately got another touchdown of their own to keep the deficit at 28. I really liked the Jags defense going into this game, but I think the Rams exposed a glaring flaw in their secondary. They managed to torch Jacksonville through the air without their best player even on the field. For the Rams, this is a huge win to keep them up in the most competitive division in the league right now, except for maybe the NFC North, and it also really justifies the expensive Davante Adams signing that a lot of people questioned over the offseason. Staying on the blowout train, Kansas City records the 3rd shutout of this season. The Raiders are genuinely just a bad team. Them beating Tennessee is at least slightly normal, but how they beat the Patriots week 1 is beyond me. The team as a whole only records 29 offensive snaps on the day, with their longest drive of the day being a measly 3 minutes long. I think the saddest part is them benching Geno Smith midway through the fourth quarter just for Kenny Pickett to immediately fumble the snap on his first play in. For the Chiefs, this game will definitely help as they attempt to climb back up the ladder after their early season slide. They didn't beat a good team, but recording a shutout is never easy in the NFL, so they should still get their props. Mahomes looked like his old self today, torching Vegas for 3 touchdowns and almost 300 yards. As much as I hate to admit it, they very well might be back. This blowout was the one I honestly least expected out of all of them. In the last 2 weeks, the Dolphins had looked pretty solid offensively, although at separate times. In week 5, their passing was stellar, and in week 6, A-Chain was running all over. Thought maybe this is the week they could put it together and do good enough to score some points on the Browns, since usually a couple touchdowns is all you need to beat Cleveland since their offense is so bad. I think I underestimated how bad the Dolphins were though. Miami did their best to keep it clean through the first half, kicking 2 field goals and only losing the ball on a fumble, but they didn't score again. Tua then proceeded to throw 3 interceptions in the second half, with number 3 being taken back the other way for 6. They bench him after this for rookie Quinn Ewers, who did decently, but the game was already over. I do feel really bad for Tua. The poor guy has sacrificed his entire mental well-being for this team just to get benched, but his turnover problem is a real issue. Usually he's at least able to put up points, but this was just a rough week. Huge win for Cleveland. Dylan Gabriel looked decent, but the real stars are their defense, and Quinshon Judkins for just hammering it in after turnovers. I promise, we're almost done with the blowouts. First, I have to talk about the Drake May MVP train. It is just so exciting watching a team that was terrible last year go out, get some weapons for their young quarterback, and then watching him absolutely demolish defenses. Granted, they were playing the Titans, but May only missed on 2 of his passes, the same amount of touchdown passes he had on the day. The New England run game also looked pretty good this week, with Ramondre Stevenson getting 88 yards on 5 yards a carry and a touchdown. This week, however, kind of just gave me another reason to feel bad for Cam Ward. He throws another interception in this game that actually just bounces off his receiver's chest. I wish so badly that teams would stop with the trend of starting rookies right off the bat. I get there's times where it's necessary and it does work out like last year with Jaden Daniels or a few years ago with CJ Stroud, but putting them in bad situations like he is here just kills their confidence and will make them worse than they potentially could have been. I'm wishing the best for Ward, and maybe this team does improve after firing their coach. Yeah, okay, I'm over-blaming Justin Fields. The Jets are just bad. It makes absolutely zero sense with the amount of talent on this roster, but probably boils down to coaching and maybe a bit of O-line struggles. This team is just terrible. It almost feels like they get worse offensively with each passing week. They actually had a stroke of luck this week with Bryce Young spinning the wheel of "Will I be terrible today?" and losing, so the Panthers didn't have a great game either, but New York still just did nothing. I feel so bad for Justin Fields too. They benched him at halftime because he was having a mediocre performance, going just 6 for 12, only for his backup Tyrod Taylor to come out in the second half, have a worse completion percentage, and throw 2 interceptions. I'm genuinely shocked that Carolina didn't win this by more. The Jets are looking straight down the throat of an 0-17 season right now, and I honestly think the only teams on their schedule that they can beat are the Dolphins and the Saints. After this game, I'm honestly shocked the Saints haven't tried out Tyler Shuck. Spencer Rattler did have the 2 touchdowns on the day, and he honestly hasn't looked terrible this season, but 3 interceptions on the day with them all being basically his fault isn't a good look. He'd actually been pretty clean with the football before this, with his only other interception being in the season opener, but this was just a rough one. Quarterback play on the other side didn't necessarily look fantastic either, but I guess you don't need it when you're taking in over 200 yards rushing. The Chicago ground game looked fantastic this week, and with enough help from their defense, they were able to turn this into a solid win. If the Bears could just manage to win one division game, they could be a serious contender this year, especially with that 4-2 record, but we'll have to see as the year unfolds. And there go all the people who said Jalen Hurts can't throw. As Saquon continues to have his worst statistical year outside of injuries, Hurts finally steps up and absolutely levels the Vikings. The quarterback goes 19 for 23 and collects over 300 yards on the day, as well as 3 touchdown passes. Carson Wentz on the other side tries to get a revenge game for the team that moved on from him during his injury-prone days, but is unable to pull it off. He struggled early in the game with a pick 6 in the second quarter, followed almost immediately by another interception on the next drive. He did turn it around in the second half and started playing better, but by then it was too little too late. The Vikings kick a wide range of field goals to make this a 6-point game, but despite maybe a couple moments in the fourth, this one was mostly out of reach for Minnesota. Doesn't help at all that they're playing in one of, if not the hardest division in the league right now, but they have got to turn it around. Carson Wentz starts next week as well, and maybe he plays better when not dealing with the pressure facing his former team. I'm still astounded by the fact that the Colts currently have the best record in the league. They honestly should even be 7-0, but Adonai Mitchell single-handedly kept that from them. It does help when your backfield consists of 2 MVP candidates, Jonathan Taylor, good running back, having a fantastic year, and then Daniel Jones. I still think the entire Giants organization should be fired for making me think Daniel Jones was a bad quarterback. I had the Colts going 4-13 purely based on the fact that Daniel Jones was starting for them. How I look like a fool. For the Chargers, it was just a rough week running the football. Herbert did throw the 2 interceptions in the second quarter, but that only ended up being 3 points for Indiana. Then you look at their rushing stats and see how Herbert led the team on the ground with just 31 yards, and you find where the problem lies. This game was over by halftime, which is really sad with how high people's hopes were for the Chargers coming into this season. They still hold second in the AFC West thanks to their win over the Chiefs earlier this season, but they got to turn it around now if they want any hope of holding on to that. And now the game everyone was waiting for. How in the world did the Giants blow this game? You have the entire fourth quarter, we'll say up by 2 possessions since the Broncos started with the ball and scored their points, though the defense should be harped on for that, just to run the clock out. Give it to the walking CTE Cam Scadaboo and just ride the game out. Instead, they decide to sling it, and at first it pays off with a 41-yard Jackson Dart touchdown pass. Then the defense gives up another touchdown, but hey, it's okay, because they burned 5 minutes off the clock in doing so. You're up 10 with 5 minutes to go, let's just run the clock out. Instead, they pass it on 3rd and 5, which is still running distance, letting Denver burn their final timeout, and it gets intercepted for the Broncos to go out and score again. Now you're only up 3 with a decent enough amount of time. Maybe now we can worry about stretching the lead, throw it on second down if we need to. Instead, they run it for only 2 yards on 2nd and 10, making it 3rd and 8, and an incomplete pass forces a punt. Bo Nix continues his fourth quarter masterclass, slicing the field to take the lead for the first time all game with just a minute 51 left on the clock. The Giants offense finally gets it together, and by gets it together, I mean are handed the drive on a silver platter by penalties and score a touchdown to go up 1 point. Now New York, you have a team with no timeouts, only 30 seconds on the clock. This should be easy, just play deep, play the sticks. Instead, they let up a 29-yard deep ball, line up in the neutral zone to stop the clock, giving Bo Nix time for another deep completion and a 39-yard game-winning kick. This was both an absolutely fantastic showing from Bo Nix and company, as well as the worst coaching performance I've seen in a while, and I watched Penn State play football this year. I really want this Giants team to be successful, but I'm afraid this organization is going to ruin the CTE brothers in the same way they ruined Daniel Jones. I'm a really big fan of those graphics that always come out at the end of the season that say something like, what would every team's record be if one-score games were flipped? For the poor Cardinals, the answer is 5-2, with every single one of their losses being within 4 points, and their wins all being within 7. This team is the definition of playing to the competition, with them keeping up with some really good teams like the Packers and Colts, with those losses both being by 4, but also blowing wins against worse teams like the Titans game. They were winning this game too, with Jacoby Brissett honestly having a great game through the air, but they lost the lead with less than 2 minutes to go and turned it over on downs. This win doesn't make me feel comfortable if I'm a Green Bay fan, but that's how every game apparently has felt against the Cardinals this year. Hopefully Arizona can turn it around, but they have to be able to finish in these games. I genuinely cannot understand what the Cowboys are this season. They have an MVP level quarterback that almost no one talks about and are either blowing teams out or getting blown out. Luckily for them, this was a good week with Dak continuing to silence anyone who talks bad about him, even though they will still talk bad about him, as he throws for 264 yards and 3 touchdowns. Javonte Williams also shines in the run game at home with 116 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Luck did not favor the Commanders either this week, with Jaden Daniels going down once again with an injury, bringing in Marcus Mariota, who just couldn't move the ball. Sometimes in games, there is just a clearly better team, and despite Washington keeping up for the first half, it just wasn't meant to be. Dallas with a much-needed win as they try to contend for the NFC East auto bid spot with the Eagles. The Falcons go to San Francisco on Sunday Night Football for this week's snooze fest of the week. Yes, this game was close for the majority and had its exciting moments, but there's just not a lot of fun to be had watching Michael Penix try and look like a good quarterback against the hospital 49ers team. Mac Jones, for the first time in his starting tenure for San Fran, doesn't do a lot and is mostly carried by Christian McCaffrey's 2-touchdown day. These touchdowns come at a price as the 49ers lose their center and a cornerback in the first half, as the 49ers continue to sacrifice players in order to keep McCaffrey healthy. It also seems Atlanta forgot their best player is their running back, as Bijan only got the ball 14 times compared to Penix's 38 pass attempts. This was a rough game offensively for both teams, but at least the Niners have a bit of an excuse for it. This game honestly just made Buffalo look a lot worse. Sadly, the Bucs' injury problems had to catch up with them eventually. Baker does what he can, but Mike Evans suffering a potentially season-ending injury and Igbukah going down again, there's just not much to be done. Detroit also manages a pretty solid game on top of this, with Goff throwing for a touchdown offset by his interception, and Jahmyr Gibbs just having his way on the ground. I have to admit, I was a little worried about the Lions at the start of the season, but they've done a lot to show that Dan Campbell is the truth, and it honestly just seems like they're having fun. They get a bye week next week to recuperate and come out swinging again, but they're still second in the division thanks to a Week 1 loss to Green Bay. Seattle did their best to try and make this as close of a game as possible, but Houston was having absolutely none of it because they thought the Seahawks deserved this win. They did slip up and accidentally score an offensive touchdown on their last drive of the game, but it was okay because they still lost. Seriously felt like neither of these teams' hearts were really in it at any point in the game. Seattle does actually have a solid performance, putting up 27 points, but they probably won't do that against most other teams, especially with these turnovers. They turned the ball over 4 times, with one of them being a scoop and score, and yet still managed the 27 points on a solid Houston defense. Maybe Seattle is better than I thought, but if they want any shot at going far in the playoffs, they have to fix those turnovers. Houston had a very similar problem, but since their offense is significantly worse, they couldn't turn it around in the same way Seattle did. Huge win for the Seahawks to stay competitive in the 5-2 locked NFC West. I go 10-5 in this week's games, a much needed bounce back after several pretty bad prediction weeks. Honestly, this is the most fun I've had watching the NFL in a while, as it truly feels like any given Sunday, and it is possible for any team to win. Obviously, makes my job a little harder, but hey, that's the fun of it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you at the end of week 8.